Iran is one of them. And not only sovereign, but not subjected to the diktats of the international financial system and the weaponized dollar. From the point of view of Washington, of course, and the Atlanticist axis, we can put it this way, this is anathema. Of course, there's not much they can do against Russia and China. Superpowers, both, and one of them, the number one nuclear superpower in the world. But against Iran, they think they can. So that's why we have, as you just mentioned, Tel Aviv issuing diktats that should be followed by the Trump administration. So Israel gets its war against Iran, which is viewed by Israel as an existential threat. And this brings us to the triad of diktats. Iran should not have a nuclear enrichment program, period. Iran should decrease its ballistic missile program to the bare minimum. And Iran should not support what all of us independents call the axis of resistance, including the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah, militias in Iraq, etc. We can talk, of course, about the Epstein files, but all of us everywhere are speculating on what the Epstein files really reveal about Trump-Epstein relationship. There are many possibilities, including the fact that he was deep into it. So this is being used, obviously, by the masters of that death cult in West Asia as a form of pressure against him. But the most important thing is his donors, the people who finance his re-election. They are all hardcore Zionists. And of course, the diktats apply to this international Zionist axis from Washington, New York to Tel Aviv, and including capitals in Europe. But the Minister of Defense in Moscow, they have the evidence that the Americans were behind it. And they handed over that evidence to the US military attaché in Moscow. The thing is, considering everything that was especially not leaked, we don't know if this evidence directly implicates the CIA or a rogue cell of the CIA or a rogue cell in industrial military complex, etc. But there was American direct involvement, that's for sure. And after that, the point of view of the presidency in Moscow and the Security Council, including our unplugged friend Medvedev, who is allowed to say what he thinks, in public, right, changed radically. And now we have Lavrov himself saying that the spirit of Anchorage is practically dead. And I remember a few days after Anchorage, whenever the Minister of Foreign Relations in Russia was talking about it, they were saying, look, we have agreed on a set of guidelines, and we hope to progress from there. But then nothing happened. And that's why we can see, even from Lavrov and Ryabkov, number 2 at the foreign ministry, uber diplomats, they are obviously exasperated. The language, the tone changed completely compared to, let's say, 2 months ago. Completely. And after the attack in Novgorod, wow, that was the straw that broke the nuclear camel's back.
Right.
Chongqing, as you know, is directly administered by Beijing. It's one of the only 5 cities in China that have this status. So Chongqing is very, very important. So a lot of important information flows through Chongqing. And it's obvious that the Chinese are basically studying millimeter by millimeter the positioning of the Trump 2.0 administration. But obviously, they do not trust it at all. I would not say that the Russians are at that level, but the Chinese are already on another level. And now the Chinese are much more assertive than they used to be in what they do practically and in what they say in their foreign ministry briefings. And, coming to the, I would say, the core of this column that you just mentioned, which was published an hour ago or so, now they're actually helping, in terms of military intel, Iran directly, which is something that did not happen before the 12-day war. The Islamic Revolution was end of 78, beginning of 79. This was right at the beginning of Deng Xiaoping in power. And it's very important to remember what the Chinese were talking about the revolution at the time. I would say between 79, 80, 81. That was the first few years of Deng Xiaoping before he ordered China to start growing like crazy in his famous 82. Well, the Chinese intellectuals were looking at this revolution as a revolution organized from a religious point of view in terms of Shiite theology, but also in under a neocolonial overview. So it was a mix of both. So in China, this became extremely popular, especially after Khomeini himself at the time, he said, our new foreign policy is going to be neither East nor West. Obviously, people in Beijing found that, wow, so now we can have a very good close relationship with the Persians like we used to have in the past, like during the Silk Roads, for instance, when we were the two top powers in opposite ends of the Silk Road, and our main interest was doing trade with each other.
Right.
So the long cultural interpenetration of Persian culture, Chinese culture, this comes from centuries. And now it's renewed because two key factors. Number one, Iran is one of the top energy suppliers of China. So Iran for China is a matter of national security. And number two, Iran is the most important node in West Asia of the new Silk Roads, of the Belt and Road Initiative. Most of the trade traffic coming from China, crossing Central Asia, and then going to Europe, goes through Iran before heading west. So they are important from a geoeconomic point of view and from an energy point of view. So you simply cannot have a destabilized Iran, because the Chinese know very well, if Iran is destabilized, it's going to be absorbed by NATO, and it's going to be immediately anti-Chinese. Iran is using Beidou. It's not using GPS anymore. So Iran is already linked to the Chinese satellite system. And the Chinese are providing satellite information gathered in real time, 24/7, on the movements of the US Navy in the Arabian Sea. By the way, they are not in the Sea of Oman. The Americans they don't have the balls to get into the Sea of Oman, because they would be very close to the southern shores of Iran and very close to these Chinese ships. So they are in the Arabian Sea. This means they are, to put it roughly, south of Pakistan. What we have at the moment is the imposition of this triad of diktats by Israel, which is exactly what Netanyahu yesterday was doing in the White House, forcing Trump to make this decision. And the way it's interesting the way Trump phrased this post. It's non-committal, in fact. The most important part is that he's basically saying, look, the Israelis want me to start a war. I don't want it. I still want a deal. If there is no deal, we're going to see what happens. Might agree, for instance, on enrichment up to 60%. Let's put it this way, between 50 and 60%. But if I'm not mistaken, some officials, including members of the Majlis, the parliament, Iran, said, okay, we could agree on that, but the US has to destroy all the sanctions against us, which we all know will never happen. And if anybody says they know, they're lying, because this is considered in Moscow as a supreme national security military matter. And this is the stuff that is discussed. I could venture to say that not even between Arakchi and Lavrov. This is discussed at the highest level when the Iranians send a direct emissary of Ayatollah Khamenei to meet with Putin in Moscow. This is the kind of stuff they discuss. And of course, between the ministries of defense. This means what kind of hardware and software was transferred from Russia to Tehran, in that series of IL-76 flights a few weeks ago, they were going every day from Russia to Tehran. Nobody knows for sure. It could be anything. It could be aerial defense, SIGINT communications, missiles, you name it. And nobody's going to leak anything about it in Moscow or in Tehran. That's why I call it unseen, but it's there. China, it's much closer because now they are sharing top of the line satellite intel in real time. So this means that the Iranian grid is integrated with the Chinese satellite grid. I'm not sure this is the case with Russia, and none of us can tell for sure because the Ministry of Defense in Russia will never tell any of us about it. So maybe it's more pinpointed, the kind of help coming from Russia to Iran, not necessarily linked to satellite intel. But for instance, when we remember that during the beginning of the 12-day war, when there was that famous blackout of the whole Iranian grid, and they were panicking because they were not prepared for that, they were saved by Russian technicians. Between 24 to 48 hours, and everything was put back in place by the Russians in less than 2 days. That's why the Iranian military machine started to work after 2 days. So we can assume that the degree of collaboration is also very, very close. And there are numbers which are mind-boggling, that perhaps 40% of the Iranian population hit the streets. This was the number one participation in terms of celebrating the Islamic Revolution in these past 47 years. It's immensely impressive because it shows that deep Iran and also the major regional capitals, they understand the stakes. They understood the logic behind the attempted regime change last month. They are siding with the government, even if many of them are not necessarily pro-government. They understand that the economic crisis that they're going through nowadays was basically inflicted by the Americans via manipulation of the real, which at the time, many of them couldn't make this connection, and now they can. So that explains practically half of the Iranian population in the streets, right? When you have a president of the United States, in his own words, saying, I don't care about international law, only about my morals, and you see this picture, and you see that he's receiving with the highest honors a war criminal in the White House responsible for the killing of untold numbers of civilians, including children in Gaza. And when you mix that up with the fact that his morals are not minimally concerned with what's in the Epstein files, which is essentially, I would say, the perfect Polaroid of how a great deal of Anglo-American elites behave. And this was considered normal since the go-go 80s. Next week, I'll be in Moscow. So I'm going to ask the Russians directly and expect some answers about if they are convinced that this should be the case. The Chinese, for the moment, they are acting, in fact. This message that they are sending, these naval messages they are sending means, okay, if you try something, you're going to regret it. But obviously, we know that the warmongers in the industrial military complex, among Trump's donors, and among these international Zionist axes, New York, Washington, and Tel Aviv, they don't care about that. They only want their war. And this is what Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday was telling the president of the United States. I want my war, and you have to launch it.